Tonight's lesson will kind of dig into kind of the background behind it using the text of James 3, and then you'll get a break from me next week. So it's like, win-win, you know. Hear me one week because the meeting will be here next week. So then we'll take a quick break, and then we'll dig into the lessons as they're broken out in the workbook. We'll start this evening. I've asked Benjamin Torno to lead us in a word of prayer. Brother?
Let's bow. We thank you for this day you've given us, and this time we have to come time to put our cares and worries away, to study your word, and to learn from what you say. Be with students and teachers. Help us to concentrate on the message in your word. In your son's holy name, who we are forever thankful for. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, brother. So does the Bible have much to say about our speech? Yeah, a lot. The Bible has a lot to say about our speech. If we just went to the book of Proverbs, we could just spend the whole entire quarter talking about a variety of different scriptures. And in fact, in the summer series, we're going to talk a lot about the book of Proverbs. But specifically around speech, there's a ton. You probably have your favorite one. If anybody wants to throw out their favorite one, I'm all ears, so to speak. But, I love the one that goes, a fool, he's considered a fool, but when he opens his mouth, he removes all doubt. You heard that variation of that one? Oftentimes attributed to Winston Churchill or Abraham Lincoln or whoever else we attribute things to on the internet, but it's probably based in the Proverbs. I recently came across a statistic that I thought was pretty shocking to me. The average person, how many words a year do you think you speak? How many words a year do you think you speak? Someone give a guess. Wrong. Anybody else? No, just kidding.
25 million?
Oh, it's actually good. 11 million. 11 million words. Now maybe, JD, maybe you're 25 million. But 11 million words a year. As I see, it's kind of easier to believe in certain people than others. Donna probably comes in at maybe 500,000. I don't know. So, but by the time you hit age 65, that's about 715 million words. That's a lot of words. And think about your own words. How careful are you with those 11 million words a year? Our words absolutely matter. Words are incredibly powerful. We'll just look at 3 quick verses here to focus our minds on that. But they can build up, they can encourage us, they can motivate us, but they can also tear us down. They can hurt us. They can cause horrible scars. Everybody remembers this, right? Sticks and stones. How does it go? Sticks and stones may break my bones. That is a lie, right? That is a lie. And it's something that we tell ourselves, but words can hurt. And I am sure if you're like me, you remember being the focus of hurtful words from others. But the Bible reminds us of this. If you look at Proverbs, the 18th chapter, and verse 21, your version may read a little bit different, but life and death are in the power of the tongue, and those who love it will eat its fruit. Life and death are in the power of the tongue. Do our words matter to God? I think we can all say our words matter. Do they matter to God? Look at Matthew, the 12th chapter. Matthew, our Savior, is pretty clear on this fact. If you look at Matthew, the 12th chapter, he's in a series of discussions here. He's talking with the Pharisees over time. There's all this conflict that's going on back and forth. And he makes this point beginning in verse 33 of Matthew, the 12th chapter. He says, either make the tree good and its fruit good, or make the tree bad and its fruit bad. For the tree is known by its fruit. You brood of vipers, how can you speak good when you are evil? For out of the abundance of the heart the mouth speaks. The good person out of his good treasure brings forth good, and the evil person out of his evil treasure brings forth evil. And one of the most scary verses in the Bible coming up next, verse 36, I tell you, on the day of judgment, people will give account for every careless word they speak. For by your words you will be justified, and by your words you will be condemned. Anybody ever said words carelessly? Right? It is This is just something we war with and we battle with. And we're not even talking about some of the sins that we'll talk about later in the class, and lying and profanity and taking God's name in vain. We're just talking about careless words, words that are careless, that are not there for building up. There's going to be an accounting. Why would God care about those? Why would God place so much emphasis on the Bible? Old Testament, New Testament, Jesus himself tells us that we're going to be held accountable for those. We think about the sins of the tongue, and if you're going to put on the sinometer, okay, where's adultery, murder, all that, where would sins of the tongue be? Where does it feel like they are? And I'm not saying you feel this way, but where do you think the world feels those are? Are they like right up there with adultery and murder? No, they're not. And so we kind of get this idea, and we get lulled into this understanding of this belief, or we kind of buy into this idea that it's not, that they're just minor sins, that God may overlook those. Jesus, though, tells us that he's very aware of the devastating nature of our words. Look at Ephesians, the 4th chapter. Ephesians 4th chapter. This would be a great little sermon at some point. Three points in the lesson is yours. He's been talking to the church in Ephesus about unity. He talks about no longer walking as the Gentiles. They've become callous in verse 19. He tells them in verse 25 to put away falsehood. They're obviously having a challenge with their speech. Don't be angry, be angry and do not sin. That's where we get the do not let the sun go down on your anger. Then in verse 29, he goes on to say, let no corrupting talk come out of your mouths, but only such as is good for building up, as fits the occasion, that it may give grace to those who hear. 3 points. 3 points from this one verse. Nothing corrupt should ever come out of a Christian's mouth. How would you define corrupt? What's that mean? Let no corrupting talk. What would be synonyms for that, or examples of that, JD?
Perhaps lies, even though that's not the
Dishonesty, that would be corrupt. What else?
Just anything that brings other people down rather than building them up.
Brings people down, so dishonorable, cutting remarks, yeah. What else? Gossip. Unprincipled, unscrupulous, amoral, anything that is not building up. But so nothing corrupt should pass our lips. The second thing is only things that build others up should come from our mouths. And then the third is the speech should fit the occasion. You read those things, and that's a pretty high standard. If you think about every word that we say, not being careless, knowing the danger of those, and that there's nothing corrupt should ever come across our lips, we should only say things that build people up. And it should fit the occasion. That's a pretty high bar. So the text for this evening is from James, the 3rd chapter. How do we accomplish that? And even in the book of James, we're going to see how this is no easy feat. So let's turn to the book of James. Let's turn to the text for tonight's lesson. That's in James, the 3rd chapter. And we're just going to read those first 12 verses and then kind of dig into what James, the 3rd chapter, is telling us about taming the tongue. James 3, beginning in verse 1. Not many of you should become teachers, my brothers, for you know that we who teach will be judged with greater strictness. For we all stumble in many ways, and if anyone does not stumble in what he says, he is a perfect man, able also to bridle his whole body. If we put bits into the mouths of horses so that they obey us, we guide their whole bodies as well. Look at the ships also. Though they are so large and are driven by strong winds, they are guided by a very small rudder, wherever the will of the pilot directs. So also the tongue is a small member, yet it boasts of great things. How great a forest is set ablaze by such a small fire. And the tongue is a fire, a world of unrighteousness. The tongue is set among our members, staining the whole body, setting on fire the entire course of life, and set on fire by hell. For every kind of beast and bird, of reptile and sea creature can be tamed, and has been tamed by mankind. But no human being can tame the tongue. It is a restless evil, full of deadly poison. With it we bless our Lord and Father, and with it we curse people who are made in the likeness of God. From the same mouth come blessing and cursing. My brothers, these things ought not to be so. Does a spring pour forth from the same opening both fresh and salt water? Can a fig tree, my brothers, bear olives, or a grapevine produce figs? Neither can a salt pond yield fresh water. So how can we control the tongue? After he describes true saving faith in James, the second chapter, so if you look just the one chapter before, James chapter 2, he talks in verse 14 about faith that doesn't have works. Can faith save him? If a brother or sister is poorly clothed, lacking in daily food, he goes on to talk about, no. In verse 18, someone will say, you have faith and I have works. Show me your faith apart from your works, and I will show you my faith by my works. Immediately following that discussion, he then focuses his attention for the Christians that he's writing to. He focuses their attention on the tongue. And he does that because the tongue always reveals who we are. In Luke, the 6th chapter, this is kind of the companion text to the Matthew 12 chapter. But if you look at Luke 6 and beginning in verse 43, Jesus tells us, for no good tree bears bad fruit, nor again does a bad tree bear good fruit. For each tree is known by its own fruit. For figs are not gathered from thorn bushes, nor are grapes picked from a bramble bush. The good person out of the good treasure of his heart produces good, and the evil person out of his evil treasure produces evil. For out of the abundance of the heart his mouth speaks. It's impossible. It is absolutely impossible for us to hide who we are for long. Our words are absolutely going to reveal what's in our hearts. Christ said that a good tree can't produce bad fruit, and a bad tree can't produce good fruit. Whatever fills our heart is ultimately going to come out. So James here in his text challenges these Jewish Christians to consider the fruits of their tongue and what it reveals about their faith. What does the fruit of your tongue reveal about your faith? And then he also challenges them to sanctify or control their tongues. And that's not the first time in the book of James that he's mentioned the importance of the tongue. If you just turn back to 2 chapters, look at James 1 and verse 26. If anyone thinks he is religious and does not bridle his tongue, but deceives his heart, this person's religion is worthless. These Jewish Christians must have been really struggling with their words, speaking evil against one another. In James 1:19, he says, "Let every person be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to anger." In James 2 and verse 12, he says, "Speak and act as those who will be judged by a law that gives freedom." In James 3, as we've already read, half the text is about the tongue. He goes on in James 4:11 to not slander anyone. In James 5 and verse 12, let your yes be yes, let your no be no, essentially talking to them, commanding them to stop lying. The mouths of these Jewish Christians were clearly doing damage to each other, to their churches, and James is challenging their faith and encouraging them to live out their faith through their speech, through their language. And this can be a paradox if you think about this. We've been born again. We've been born again. We've been born again to a new life, and we've been changed. 2 Corinthians 5 tells us that. New creatures. So as a new creature, we should have new natures. We should be different, and we should be seeking to look more like Jesus every single day. And this is what James is challenging the Christians in the book of James, these believers, about in this text, specifically focusing on their language, on their tongues. James 3 and verse 2 says that, "For we all stumble." Every last one of us. "For we all stumble in many ways." If someone doesn't stumble in what he says, he is a perfect individual, able to control the entire body as well. The word perfect there is actually the same one that's used in chapter 1, verse 4. Does anybody have a different translation for? Look at chapter 1 and verse 4. "If any of you let steadfastness have its full effect, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing." Anybody have a different translation for the word perfect? Yes. Mature. That's the same word. That's the same Greek word that's in James chapter 3. He's not saying you're perfect in the sense of never make a mistake, but what you're gaining towards, what you're achieving towards, is that maturity as a Christian. As a mature Christian growing in faith, you're going to show that, you're going to depict that, you're going to demonstrate that in your language and your tongue. A controlled tongue is a sign of spiritual maturity. That's what he's saying. And when James says this, you're not perfect in the sense of being sinless, and that's one of the major themes in the letter. In James chapter 3, in the text that we just read, there's a lot of insights here that we'll go through just as the basis for this class before we go on, but telling us these insights on how to control our tongues. And he's going to use 8 different metaphors. He's going to use 8 different metaphors in this text that we just read about the tongue. There's a bit in the mouth of a horse, a rudder of a ship, a fire, untamed animals, a restless evil, poison, a tree, and a spring. So how can believers control their tongues? How can we do it? And what's the dangers if we don't? And what are we up against to try and gain this maturity and this ability to bridle our tongues? He starts off in verse 1 of chapter 3, and he says, "Not many of you should become teachers, my brother, for you know that we who teach will be judged with greater strictness." Now, you might be trapped or tricked into thinking, all chapter 3 is all about teachers. It's not all about teachers. When he says not many of you should become teachers, he's not trying to say, hey, we don't want anybody to teach the 5th and 6th graders, right? Or we don't want anybody teaching back there. That's not what he's saying. He's saying that there's an extra standard for those who teach because of the things that you're saying. Because of the power of the words, a teacher has additional responsibility. If you think about Jesus again and the Pharisees, he talked about how that they in Matthew 23 what did the Pharisees, why did they want to be called rabbi? Anybody remember that? They walk around the marketplace. They like to be seen with their tassels. They like the place of honor. They want to be called rabbi. What are they trying to bring attention to? Themselves, right? It's all about them, focusing upon them, seeking the applause and the favor of people instead of the favor of God. They love being called rabbi or master, a great one. So this isn't, again, not trying to talk anybody out of teaching or becoming a minister or a preacher, but he does give special warning to those not to wrongly pursue teaching positions, because they will, as he says in verse 1 of chapter 3, receive a greater judgment. We already mentioned how we're going to be held accountable for that. God is going to judge us for our words, and if we can truly understand the severity of that and the importance of that, and how important it is to Jesus, how important it is to God, the things that come from our lips. And especially if we're in a teaching position or have influence over others, that additional accountability and responsibility that we have for the things that come out of our mouths. If we understand that God is going to judge our words, that really helps us understand and encourage the reason that we practice sober and wise speech. If you also think about controlling the tongue, the reason it's important, we've got to recognize that it has the power to direct lives. In verses 3 through 5, it talks about the bit in the mouth of the horses. They guide their entire bodies, and the ship, the very small rudder guiding the ship where it goes. So that bit and that rudder, though it's small, it can change the direction of a large horse. A very small rudder can change the direction of a very large ship. In Proverbs 18 and 21, we read, "Death and life are in the power of the tongue." You think about conversations that Jesus had that totally changed the direction of someone's life. I think about John, the 4th chapter, when he's having a conversation with the woman at the well. Do you remember that conversation? He changed that woman's life by the conversation that he had. Not only changed that woman's life, but he changed the lives of those who then heard her speak about the Messiah. In fact, in John 4 and 42, the people who heard her speak then say to the woman, "It's no longer because of what you said that we believe, for we have heard for ourselves, and we know that this is indeed the Savior of the world." Where else do we read about great speeches in the Bible? Where do you think about Acts 2? Great speech. What happened as a result of Peter's words?
Hearts were pricked.
their hearts were pricked. Right? The tongue has great power to direct people's lives. The woman at the well, the people at Pentecost. Great power for tremendous good. But also, when Satan tempted Eve in the garden, what did he say? Did God really say that? Did he really say that? He sowed seeds of doubt in Eve. You think about other leaders of the world. You think about Adolf Hitler. You think about Joseph Stalin. You think about Saddam Hussein. Powerful oration. Have you ever watched clips, those old black and white clips of Adolf Hitler speaking at those rallies? He's an impressive speaker. Even if you don't know German, just listening to him, and it's like he is a very powerful and emphatic speaker. Words are powerful. Not only can they direct individuals, they can even direct entire countries for good or evil. When you think about the illustration of the bit in the horse of the mouth and the rudder of the ship, it really implies that in order to use our words for good, we actually have to overcome some pretty powerful forces. The bit has got to overcome the power of that horse, and the rudder has to overcome the power of the wind and the waves that are pushing that ship along. And we've got to overcome various forces too. We've got to overcome the power of our flesh, our predisposition towards anger, towards slander, towards impatience, complaining. We've got to overcome circumstances that present themselves, whether good or bad. Someone being rude to us, someone speaking angrily to you, someone cutting you off in the lane. I'm sure I probably have cut some of y'all off trying to pull around the corner there. I'm not saying I have. I'm just saying it could have happened. When Christ rebukes Satan's spoken words, you think about, look back at Matthew, the 16th chapter. This is Jesus talking, Matthew 16 and verse 23. Matthew 16 and verse 23. Jesus is talking about his death and resurrection, and Peter takes him aside in verse 22 and begins to rebuke him. And what does Jesus say? Get behind me, Satan. Satan will use us. Satan will use our words to discourage other people, to discourage ourselves. Satan wants to control our words. So that's kind of what I think he means of it in chapter 3 and verse 6 when he says that the tongue is set on fire by hell. It is just incredibly powerful. And Satan wants to control it. He wants to use it. He wants to use negative or even potentially positive circumstances to do that. And Satan certainly, absolutely understands that words have the power to control and guide someone's lives. And so what's he want to use words to power and guide and control people's lives for? Good or bad? Absolutely bad. He is going to use this very powerful tool, and it is unfortunately, very easy for him to do. I'm curious, as just kind of a question here, if you're interested, feel free to share. The question is, in what ways have you experienced how words spoken to you had a tremendous impact on the direction of your life? I've got a story to tell, but I don't want to tell and somebody else has a story to tell. How have somebody's words changed the direction of your life? Yes, Kyle?
I think about a night when I was a little kid, I went out on the porch because I was given an assignment in Bible class to memorize a verse. I got to pick the verse and ask my dad what verse, and he just suggested I memorize Matthew 5 verse 8. And for some reason that just really stuck with me, and it's always come back to my mind over and over again in my life, just because he just mentioned it to me and took the time to help me think about memorizing it.
That's great. Anybody else? Yes, Erwin.
I've had lots of people influence me in positive ways, but most of us have heard of Booker T. Washington. Something that I've told a lot of college students is, and he's quoted as saying this, don't let someone's opinion of you become your reality. And I think that's so true. Just because it's an opinion doesn't mean there's anything real about it.
And it's unfair and it's unfortunate that at times we allow people's words to move us in a negative direction instead of in a positive direction. My whole career changed because of the words of one man. I had always wanted to be a veterinarian, and I sat and I was working for a horse vet, and we drove around in a truck all day, and he was miserable. And he was miserable, and he told me how miserable his life was. And I was thinking, I was in college, and I was thinking, man, this sounds terrible. I don't want to do this. And so I changed major. I changed my whole career. I think I would have loved being a vet, but I allowed somebody to change the direction of my life by the words they spoke and how they complained, and that impacted me in a very, very real way. I don't think Donna would have married a veterinarian. She doesn't like those animal smelly things, so that probably wouldn't happen. But yes, Ricardo.
Me, it's really like, learning English as a second language.
Learning English?
I had a teacher that, what he used to tell to the students is get up, okay, and say, I can and I will. Like a military type of stuff. But those two words, I wish I could see that professor and thank him because, he injected a lot of energy. I need to learn English.
And that made an impact on you.
I say, well, people now understand me, I think, or probably they don't, I don't know. But he was a big influence on that for me because I have a lot of relatives, same age like me, that they kind of dropped it.
So think about that tonight. Think about in your lives, people that have made an impact on you for good or bad by the things that they have said. And think about you and your words. What are the impact that your words are having for good or bad on other people? Right? Not only will God judge our words, and not only can the tongue direct lives and move us in different directions, but the tongue itself has this very, very destructive nature, and we've got to recognize the destructive nature of the tongue. If you look in James chapter 3 again in verses 5 through 6, he compares the tongue to a fire. A tiny flame sets a huge forest on fire. The soak in the tongue cause great destruction. Verse 6, he compares it to various phrases. He calls it a world of wrongdoing. It can cause a lot of world problems. It pollutes the entire body. It affects the mind, various parts of the body. It sets fire to the course of human existence. It can destroy a person's entire life or the direction that they're going, and is set on fire by hell. Again, really emphasizing how the devil oftentimes inspires the tongue and uses our tongues for very evil purposes. Because of the tongue's destructive nature, we've got to make a decision. We've got to choose to never speak words that are unedifying about others or even ourselves. In Proverbs 26 and verse 20, you'll be familiar with this one. Where there is no wood, what happens to the fire? It goes out. When there's no wood, a fire goes out. When there's no gossip, contention ceases. When we stop speaking ungodly words, that's going to have a positive influence in our friendships, in our families, in our communities. As I mentioned at the beginning, that old proverb, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words may never hurt me. It's absolutely wrong. Words can cause tremendous destruction, and we've got to be aware of that. We've got to be aware of it to stop it from happening. Think about this question for a moment. Why is it so common for believers to fall into the trap of using ungodly speech, such as gossip, slander, criticism, flattery, coarse joking? Why do you think that's so uncommon? And then what are some common triggers that lead you into ungodly speech? So think about the first one. Why do you think it's still so common? Yes, JD?
Unfortunately, I believe that the source of the first problem is the same source behind how the Pharisees and Sadducees and scribes thought they could get away with just about anything. A whole do it as I say, do it not as I do. It's pride, thinking that you're so much better than everyone else. Like the gossip and slander, that can be used just very easily to talk about someone you're not a very big fan of, and with like-minded individuals, just make fun of them behind their backs, and flattery, of course, to get on people's good side, get them to like you, and more or less, for lack of a better term, leech off of their influence that they have.
So, kind of if you make them feel worse or lower them, it kind of the opposite reaction is trying to make yourself feel better. Okay, what else? Why do we fall into this? Yes, Tim.
Let the world determine our moral compass.
Okay, how does that play out?
Well, the world sometimes doesn't determine that these things are very sinful or very evil or very wrong, and sometimes we'll go along with that. It's like, right now we can mostly all agree that, things like murder and even adultery in a lot of circles is still wrong, but what we have here, it's not so bad, right? That's what the world tells us. Sometimes that's how we get in the same trap.
You ever been kind of tricked into or fallen into this trap? Guys, maybe you're in the locker room, somebody's telling a dirty joke, and you're trying to be part of the crowd. And what do you do when they tell the dirty joke? Kind of laugh along with it, right? Somebody's telling you something that they shouldn't be telling you, and instead of stopping them and saying, I really don't want to hear that, you kind of, oh, hey, really, is that interesting? That's interesting. It is so easy to do. Some of it may be allowing the world to just corrupt our moral compass. Other parts of it may be we want to fit in. We want to fit in with the crowd. We want to look like them. We want them to accept us. And you think about those. We want to fit in with the world, and we want the world to accept us. Think about how wrong that thinking is. Wayne?
To add to that, we want to fit in, and so it's easy to fall into these behaviors because it draws attention to yourself. Maybe you start feeling popular, or it builds your self-esteem in the wrong type of ways. But it's a way to, like you say, fit in and be part of the crowd. And as Christians, we know we can't always be part of the crowd, and we can't always fit in and shouldn't be. But it's an easy trap.
It's easy to do. It is easy to do. I can't tell you how many times it's happened to me, and how many times I've fallen for that. It's Satan's way of tricking us. Right? What about the common triggers? I mentioned me pulling in front of you in the lane out there. That can be a trigger. What else are common triggers for us? Emotions, okay. Negative or positive or?
It can be both. We know it's not sinful to be angry, but if you get excited enough about something, your speech can reflect that.
Yeah.
On the flip side, we can be moved to incredible amounts of empathy and speak words of life to people. So.
Yeah. Yes, Chris.
If someone says something negative about you, that could trigger you to trigger back at them.
Yeah. So kind of respond in a similar way, and it just goes back to what we said before. Man, it's painful. It hurts, and it makes us oftentimes want to lash back out. Yes, Rob.
For me, it's jumping to assumptions.
Ooh, yes, jumping to assumptions. This happens at work all the time, where we want to make a decision about something and we don't have enough information, and yet we're willing to assume something and make a decision, maybe an important decision, not having enough information, not having enough facts. And so what happens when you make that assumption about someone's actions or behavior? Then you wind up saying something you shouldn't have said. Anybody else? Yes, Tim.
So I don't think we can get rid of a lot of the triggers. I think they're always going to be there. I think it goes back to what you said earlier about what you put into your heart. If you have in your heart that, and you're hearing it all the time, you change. And the things that are going to come out of your mouth is what you've turned into your heart. And so I think the triggers are just going to just show what's on the inside.
Look at this next point here. So not only will God judge our words, why is this important? God's going to judge our words. The tongue can change lives for good or bad. The tongue is very destructive just by its very nature. And then this one can make you, that's kind of concerning. Jesus says he's going to hold us accountable for what? Every careless word. And then let's read this. Verse 7, every kind of beast. Well, let's go back to verse 6. The tongue is a fire, a world of unrighteousness. The tongue is set among our members, stains the whole body, sets on fire the entire course of life, set on fire by hell. For every kind of beast and bird, of reptile and sea creature can be tamed and has been tamed by mankind. but no human being can tame the tongue. Ooh, well, that's not so good. We're going to be held accountable. Every careless word. He just got through telling us that if, in chapter 1, that if we don't bridle our tongue, the person's religion is worthless. And then he says, no human can tame it. What's out of the equation? What are we leaving out of the equation? God. That's exactly right. Jesus recognized that. And Paul, I love this scripture in Romans 6. Take a look at Romans, the 6th chapter. Romans, the 6th chapter, and verse 6. Let's go back up to verse 5. For if we have been united with him in a death like his, talking about Jesus, we shall certainly be united with him in a resurrection like his. We know that our old self was crucified with him in order that the body of sin might be brought to nothing, so that we would no longer be enslaved to sin. Do you understand what he's saying there? We don't have to be enslaved to sin. The fact that we are born again and a new creature, we are not bound to the sin that previously enslaved us. He calls it in James a restless evil, a deadly poison. In order to control our tongues and other sinful tendencies, we have to remember that God already broke the power of sin. He already broke the power of sin over our lives through Christ's death on the cross. It's really important to us when we think about sins that have a grip on us, whether it's our language or other sins that we're really struggling with. When Satan has a grip on us, he's lying to us. He's been able to convince us that we can't do anything about it, that we'll never be free from that. We can't escape it. It's had us too long. We can't resist. Pornography, language, alcoholism. There's no way. There's just no way that you can overcome that. There is. In fact, it's guaranteed. Christ's death has broken the power that sin has over us. That doesn't mean it's not going to be hard. Doesn't mean it's not going to be difficult. Doesn't mean that you're not going to have to work at it. But it absolutely is a guarantee and a promise that it is possible to not be enslaved to this. Regardless of how we feel, what others say, what circumstances seem to indicate it, we were set free from the bondage of sin on the cross. And we've got to fight sin, understanding that reality. We are fighting from the winning position. We are fighting as victors. We're not fighting as losers. We've got to understand it. First Hugh and then Richard.
We have a song in our Sing to the Lord supplement called Lord Reign in Me. Now, the author of this section, at the end of that section, says, no unredeemed man can control. Well, no ship without someone at the helm.
Good point.
Can affect the rudder. No rider on a horse.
Somebody's directing it.
Can affect that. So we have to attempt to maintain the reign that God has in us.
And we're going to connect that to Galatians 5 and how to do that. Okay, first I want to get to Richard.
So we know Paul said he had to buffet his body daily.
I thought that was buffet his body daily. I've been getting that completely wrong. Okay. Buffet his body daily.
We have to have the self-awareness of self-control and what triggers us, coupled with the fact that we're a child of God.
Coupled with the fact that we're a child of God. John 8 and verse 34, it's actually in verse 36, but we're going to read 34 through 36. John chapter 8, he's just got through saying, you will know the truth will set you free. Look at verse 34 of John 8. Jesus answered them, truly, truly, I say to you, everyone who practices sin is a slave to sin. The slave does not remain in the house forever. The Son remains forever. So if the Son sets you free, you will be free indeed. Other verses may say, you are going to be really free. That's a guarantee. That's not a okay maybe. That is a guarantee. But how do we connect that? I mean, that's easy to say, right? Look at Galatians, the 5th chapter. In order for believers to really conquer sin, including sins of the tongue, God gave us a new nature. And that new nature, just as Hugh was mentioning, somebody's got to be in control of the rudder or of that bit. God gave us a new nature that's powered by something. Look at Galatians, the 5th chapter. I say, walk by the Spirit, and you will not gratify the desires of the flesh. For the desires of the flesh are against the Spirit, and the desires of the Spirit are against the flesh, for these are opposed to each other. Galatians 5, you go on to look at verse 22. Paul describes the fruits of the Spirit, love, joy, peace, etc. By walking in the Spirit, what does that mean? Walking in the Spirit. Obeying, worshiping God, turning away from the world, turning away from the sin, we gain power. We are allowing God to pull the rudder of our lives. We are allowing God to pull on the reins. We are being led by the Spirit. How can we be daily directed by the Spirit? How do we do that? How do you daily walk by the Spirit? How do we do it?
Live the Word, pray.
Pray. Live the Word. Know what the Word says. How are we going to be directed? How do you put that shelf together if you don't read the directions, right? How are you going to get there? How are you going to live daily if you're not daily looking at the Word? If you're not praying for His guidance? God's Word, prayer. If we're just simply treading water, if we're just kind of out there surviving, we're going to church on Sundays and Wednesdays, maybe read our Bible occasionally, pray here and there. If we're not being transformed by what we're reading, if we're not being transformed by the Word, we're not going to have any success. We won't be able to control our tongues. We won't be able to resist the devil. We won't be able to get rid of that sin that's got its grip on us. But if we will spend time being daily directed by the Spirit, abiding in God's Word, seeking God in prayer, what God made, our tongues, God made what was uncontrollable, controllable by breaking the power of sin that sin's power has over us, and by giving us His Spirit through the Word. We've got to believe that, and we actually have to execute on that. You may have heard that word, execute on, or actualize that. We got to make that real in our lives. It's just not something we say. Are we actually doing those things to help us control our tongues and get rid of Satan's power over us? We don't have hardly any time left. I'm going to go through two things very quickly here. Talking about consistency, just two things to help us. What are some tips to help our words be more consistent that reflect God's righteousness? Just a couple of things of maybe fun little things. For sure, we got to be consistent. We got to saturate our minds with righteous things and good things and reject ungodly. Philippians 4:8. We've got to learn to be slow to speak. We've got to decide to only speak gracious words. But this is, have you heard this mnemonic? HALT. Don't talk if any of these things are true. Don't say what you're going to say if you're hungry, if you're angry, if you're lonely, or if you're tired. Right? So think about that. HALT. Don't say that. If you're hungry, you're angry, you're lonely, or you're tired. And then think about, you're about to have this conversation, you're about to say something. Maybe somebody has said something unkind to you. Think about using think. Is it true? Is it helpful? Is it inspiring? Is it necessary? And is it kind? It goes back to Ephesians 4. Is it true? Is it helpful? Is it inspiring? Is it necessary? Is it kind? This is tough. James wrote to Jewish Christians who absolutely were struggling with their language. And that struggle they were having was actually demonstrating a deeper problem with their faith. Things that were coming out of their mouths really reflect upon the condition of our hearts. Verse 26, chapter 1, if anyone thinks he's religious yet doesn't bridle his tongue, deceives his heart, his religion is futile. Controlling our tongues is proof of having that new nature, of being born again. So James challenges them, and he challenges us, to live according to our professed faith. Because he'll judge our words. Tongue has a mighty power. It can be destructive. It's not controllable on our own. We've got to use God to help it get under control, and we've got to be consistent. Last thought is, this is my favorite verse in the Bible. Absolutely my favorite. I love reading this in the mornings before I get going on my job. Think about this. Psalms 19:14. Let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, my rock and my redeemer. Think about that verse the rest of this week, and we'll see you on Sunday morning. Thank you.